Welcome to the Braver Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. I'm your host, Ciaran O'Connor. I'm back with you, John, today. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's been a minute since the dynamic duo was in action, I feel like. Although then again, maybe time is just moving fast. I don't know.
I know, I miss you, man.
I miss you too, man. We are separated by the great landmass of the United States. You used to be out here in LA with me, but you've been in New York for a while, and I'm here on the other coast. And with the whole lockdown situation, geez, it's been a minute since we met anywhere in between.
Yeah, for our listeners, the last time I saw John was in late January of this year, although it seems like, a different universe entirely. And we shared a very pleasant afternoon at the Huntington Gardens in Pasadena, California. Highly recommend getting to check that out. Just step away from the world and enter the world of gardens, Australian, Japanese, Chinese, desert-like. So I miss you, man. We got to do that again sometime soon.
I miss you too. That was the day that Kobe Bryant passed away.
Yes, ominous.
Yeah, that was a sad thing. So it's been a year full of incredible landmarks, and not a whole lot of things happened this year that weren't too terribly happy. And yet here we stand on the other side of the 2020 election, surveying the landscape. I think that there are a lot of things taking place that have people worried. Obviously some people are going to be happy about the outcome of the election. Some people aren't. And other folks are going to say that we don't know the outcome of the election, even at this late date. But the thing that holds constant for me is the fact that our work continues at Braver Angels, the work to build a house united. There are a lot of folks talking about the need for us to reach a deeper sort of unity in America, and the work takes on, I guess, a bit of a new frame as we head towards the final innings of the year 2020. But yeah, that's my opening monologue, buddy.
I feel you. Well, I just want to ask, what have the last 2 weeks been like for you? Because for me, they've been an emotional journey that I can talk a little bit more about, because I think it might speak to maybe some of how our members are feeling. But how's it been for you, man? Just emotional wise, the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't know. I think that I have been affected a little bit less than I might almost want to admit. And maybe part of that is just because I have, I've felt myself for a long time sympathizing with folks who felt a little bit homeless in terms of their options in the presidential election. And folks know that I am a Republican, and I do agree with a number of Trump's policy decisions and so forth. But at the same time, it's hard for me to get excited about supporting him for re-election. At the same time, I think Joe Biden is a good human being. I like a lot of things about him. I also am terribly dismayed at the direction in which I see a lot of politics in general kind of moving on the left. And I think that I've never been indifferent to the outcome of the election, but the thing that animates me is the stuff that we do at Braver Angels, which is trying to make the space for us to rise to a higher level in terms of how we engage with each other, how we interact, and to build out the infrastructure in society for our institutions and our democracy to begin functioning, in a better way again. And so that's kind of where I've just stuck myself, man. That has been my, my connection to American politics, has been through that kind of work in the last last couple of years. here with you, man. But one thing I do feel, of course, is just what everybody is going through. I mean, my father is a very dedicated Trump supporter. So many of my friends and relatives, including yourself, passionately for Biden. Many people see President Trump's reluctance to seemingly concede defeat as sort of a vital threat, even at this late stage, to democracy. The anxiety that folks are feeling is palpable, and I hear from our members. I hear from people who are, pained at the outcome and pained at the uncertainty that persists even now. So I've tried to hold myself up in a way to where I can, I guess be helpful to folks who are looking for perspective in the midst of all that. Hopefully I'm doing a reasonable job at that.
I think you are, and your posture right now reflects that lofty, mighty, compassionate stance that I think so many of our folks appreciate. I would say that, what'd you say?
It's a comfortable chair. Yeah.
Yeah. It's black leather.
Yeah.
You set it up in the studio. Yeah, for me, the past 2 weeks have been just like an emotional roller coaster. I think some of it is the context of working on the 2016 election and experiencing the pain of losing an election that you invested so much into, and losing to a candidate who you were afraid would pose a threat to your values. And the last 4 years, I think, have been a roller coaster in themselves. But for me, on election night, when the returns first started coming in and Trump was, doing a lot better in Florida than the polls had predicted, I had a brief moment of deja vu to 2016 where I started thinking, is this happening again? And I sort of had a sinking pit in my stomach. And interestingly, perhaps ironically, it was Fox News's out front call of Arizona that really turned the tide. And I think for Blues, there were, some sort of gratifying irony in the fact that it was Fox News that started to turn the tide back toward Biden. And
you mean just in terms of the emotional experience of the night, so to speak?
Exactly. I mean, I think that when that call got made and then the results started coming in from Michigan and Wisconsin, I started taking a deep breath. And I think at that point, I started to believe that things were going to turn in Biden's favor. And then obviously Trump came out that night at 2:30 a.m. in the morning and claimed victory. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I was surprised based on Trump's behavior in office over the past 4 years.
Yeah.
But it was certainly an astounding sight to see the president of the United States come out and claim that he had won an election that was nowhere close to being resolved on election night. I mean, that was just, I found it to be chilling. And so I went to sleep with a good deal of anxiety. The next few days were this kind of surreal sense of suspended animation where it seemed like the election was being resolved in Biden's favor, but it hadn't officially been called. And we live in this universe where these four media networks have such power to sort of dictate the collective understanding of reality. And those 4 days, I think I didn't sleep much and I was stressed out. And there was just this sense of nervous anticipation, especially in New York City. And not to drone on too much further, but it's just been such a emotional past 2 weeks that I thought I'd share. On Saturday morning, I was in an Uber going up to my mom's place in Washington Heights when I saw a notification on my phone that said, CNN and the other networks had called it for Biden. And I started looking out the window of the Uber and I started seeing people on the street get the news for the first time. I started seeing people look at their phone, and the vast majority of people on the streets of Manhattan were erupting in jubilation or relief or crying and it was quite emotional. And then 10 minutes later, I just ended up breaking down in tears, and I didn't expect to have the waterworks like that, but I think it was all the emotions of the past 4 years just came out. And I also, through my work with Braver Angels, I think was attuned to, how a lot of my, Trump supporting colleagues were feeling, because I knew that feeling from 2016, the sense of shock, the sense of dismay, uncertainty. And a couple of our Trump supporting folks at Braver Angels texted me to offer congratulations. And that really meant a lot. I thought it was a real stand-up act. Yeah. And I came to work on Monday with a sort of renewed sense of hope that we could start to move forward. In my view, the election results having been, resolved, if not certified, is how I would personally describe them. But then, frankly, to have been pretty dismayed over the past couple of days. Mike Pompeo, some people said he might have been trolling or joking, but he said something like, "I'm confident there'll be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration." And I was like, come again? And Kevin McCarthy going on TV in the days after the election saying Trump won. And I certainly grant Trump and his campaign, the right to pursue any and all lawsuits and recounts. But what's really troubled me is it seems to be grasping at straws. Trump seems to be saying, the illegal votes were the ones who voted against me. And I think it's really corrosive to the democratic process to have such naked political considerations color a tradition that I think serves to protect the transfer of power and continuance of governance. But it's looking like, from my vantage point, a couple of Republicans in influential positions are starting to argue that Trump should consider conceding. Karl Rove wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, essentially saying that, even if all of the votes being challenged were overturned, they still wouldn't come close to covering Biden's margins of victory in the deciding states. But I think it's been a real sign of the media landscape and disinformation that there are still so many people who are so distrustful of the mainstream media that even if they can't point to significant evidence beyond, anecdotes that may be circulating, it doesn't matter. The gut feeling that, this is a conspiracy, that, elites are stealing from the election, that feeling is real and raw and strong in tens of millions of Americans. Yeah. And I'm curious, what do you make of that?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, so yeah, let me speak to that, but you also made me think of something else, if you don't mind, just really quick, with respect to feelings that I had around the election. I remember when you were talking about people starting to celebrate in the streets of New York spontaneously. It made me think about the fact that in LA, just a few hours, I guess, before that, or I guess this would have been the next day, you would have experienced that. But the day before, when the votes were being cast, I was leaving the studio here, actually, going home. I was driving up the 405 or down the 405 south here in Los Angeles, and I noticed there was this huge screen that was running CNN, doing sort of a live running the showing CNN
like on the freeway.
Yeah, on the freeway, right? I was just like, oh God, that is a bizarre and kind of dangerous thing. I thought.
Only in Los Angeles, man.
Imagine they call Ohio for Trump or something. Somebody might swerve off the road. Then I got off the freeway, was driving through past a shopping center on the way back to way back to our place, and there was this big theater screen just set up in the parking lot for people to drive up to and watch. And you say only in LA, but I don't. There was nothing like this with Obama and Romney or McCain or
This felt different.
Yeah, it felt absolutely different. It just it was like the politicization of driving, or not, or just politics it's so in everything that we do.
It felt like a clash, almost like a clash of civilizations is I think the feeling in New York on Saturday when the results were announced. I haven't seen New York City like that since maybe when Barack Obama got elected in 2008. There was a sense of joy and hope and jubilation. But this felt like something more deep because it was not joy. It was relief and just a collective outpouring of, I don't even know what, man. Central Park was crazy. That's what I'll say.
No, I understand what you're pointing to. I mean, yeah, when Barack Obama was elected, even for many people who didn't vote for him, it was kind of a celebratory affair. I mean,
right.
Overall, Obama ran an extraordinarily positive and uplifting campaign, and there's a historic nature to his election. And it was sort of like there was something in it for everybody to feel good about. Again, even if you disagreed with Obama's politics and were concerned about him, obviously most Republicans would have been. There's a deep tribal animus in this election, and so I was listening to Ben Shapiro a little while ago. Part of what he's seizing on is what he considers to be, and I'm sure many folks would agree with him, sort of the hyperventilating of the left and of the media establishment over the idea that Trump is somehow going to try and forcefully cling to power, right? And so, what he's saying, what other folks are saying, is that look, this is a partisan media establishment that's trying to whip people up into a furor, trying to get people afraid of the president, a media establishment that has referred to him as, or made him seem like Orange Hitler or what have you, for the last several years. But really, all Trump is doing is, like you just said, Ciaran, pursuing his legal recourse to have votes, recounted.
Well, he's also claiming that he won and the election was stolen. He's not out there saying, let's please have a calm recounting of votes. He's saying that he won. I think there's a pretty significant difference between those two things.
Right. But that the things that he's doing that I guess would potentially provide an avenue, theoretically speaking, for a change in the outcome of the election are nevertheless things that are legal and within the bounds of what the Constitution allows. And, Shapiro has made the point that, given the fact that all of this is legal and constitutional, it's hard to credibly call it a coup unless you have an interest in further polarizing the American people, which the mainstream media do. So I'm giving you his analysis because I think it's an interesting entryway into this part of the conversation here. For me, I think that it won't surprise you to note that I come down somewhere a little bit in between here, because on the one hand, I do think that, the president of the United States has legal recourses available to him to seek to ensure the integrity of the election. He should pursue those, I think, is my opinion. And folks who think that the president should pursue those, folks who have suspicions about the integrity of the outcome, I think are more than entitled to those feelings. I wouldn't want to marginalize the suspicion that, as you point out, many Americans feel, because the whole environment of our politics has primed us all to be distrustful of the outcome, whichever way is going to go this time around.
Right.
So, left or right, that suspicion is understandable, I think. And I do think that there is a way in which the salaciousness of uncertainty, coupled with the president's comments, feed into what I think is the problem with a lot of the media establishment, which is that it's a business model largely based on polarization. So if there's a little
Right.
reason to worry about something, the way things are covered, it's going to blow up into something, it's always going to magnify the potential, the quality of fear that is associated with whatever's taking place. Having said all that, though, I do agree with you. I mean, it'll be interesting to look back, I think, on the presidency of Donald Trump and have a conversation about, just what is the significance of the words of a president, right? Because many folks who defend President Trump, and like I said, I mean, I can find things that he's done on a policy level that I would agree with and be supportive of, and maybe things that I might think he deserves more credit for than he gets. But a lot of folks who defend President Trump as a leader will say that, look, there's a difference between words and actions. That President Trump may speak in a certain way that flames division and bothers some people, but he's getting real things done for the American people. And if he is combative, he's responding to a manipulative and misleading media establishment and a Democratic Party that will cheat and undermine American democracy in whatever ways folks see it as doing so. That Trump's tendency to, if you want to be generous about it, say embellish or mislead or just say things that are flat out pugilistic, that we should put these things aside because at the end of the day he's just giving as good as he gets, and he's still bringing home the bacon for America, right? Which I think is a perfectly coherent argument. But I do think that one aspect of leadership that should be at the center of how we think of a good leader is the capacity of a person to, I think, speak and communicate with the folks who he or she represents, the folks who he or she leads, in a way that creates the context for us to be able to speak and communicate with one another, to be able to live with one another and to trust one another, right? And I think it takes a certain magnanimity and a certain generosity, even towards one's critics and opponents, to be able to do that. Politicians, especially these days, are rarely able to do that effectively, I think, because the environment pushes towards polarization, and politics is competitive anyway. But I think if you look at Ronald Reagan, if you look at Barack Obama, if you look at Jack Kennedy, you'll see examples of leaders who were always striving to hit that balance. And I think President Trump has kind of willfully thrown that out the window. And so he is the most powerful man in the world. And I don't blame you, Ciaran, for feeling a certain serious anxiety when he comes out and says that he's won the election, because you would think that the words of a president would would potentially, indicate some bigger thing, right? Now, it's possible, and I think it's probable, that he's just, he's talking a certain game, as he's prone to do, and that when the dust is settled and the decisions have been rendered in court or what have you, at whatever level, if it turns out to be the case that that Joe Biden is president-elect, I believe that President Trump will step down and walk away, should it turn out that way. But the feeling that you have, I think, is eminently understandable, because this is the leader of the free world. And
right. And well, I'm not saying that I expect Trump to activate the armed forces to orchestrate a coup.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say two things. One is, I don't think Trump ever admit that he lost the popular vote in 2016.
No. Right.
Number two, I think there's serious consequences to his words, because tens of millions of Americans believe what he is saying.
Yeah.
And so when he is lying and delegitimizing America's democratic processes and the rule of law, that his followers are absorbing that, and I think that's it's unfortunate. But to your second point about leadership, I could not agree with that more. And that's one reason I've been pleased with the approach that Joe Biden took throughout the campaign, but especially in the wake of his presumed victory. Because, you know, in his victory speech, I think he made a conscious effort to do what you were saying, to try to say that he's the president of all Americans, you know, not my people, as Trump would say. I think Trump is constantly trying to pit his supporters against a perceived enemy, be they the Democrats or the media or the deep state or what have you. And I know there will folks who will say, you know, Biden's being insincere, or, you know, look at what so-and-so leftist said on Twitter, you know, and I agree. There's certainly many Democratic politicians and media figures who have been the opposite of magnanimous. They've been spiking the football. They've been gloating. They've been just continuing to channel this condescending vitriol toward Trump supporters, which I think is harmful and corrosive. But I think Biden, who is now the leader of the Democratic Party and soon to be the leader of this country, has made empathy and magnanimity, if I'm saying that correctly, a centerpiece of his campaign. And I hope to see that continue. I've been encouraged, frankly, by his approach to the last few days. Because he hasn't been like the hyperventilators. He hasn't been out there saying, you know, Trump is organizing a coup. He's just sort of calmly said, you know, let the results. He basically was like, yo, I know Mitch will come around in his kind of, you know, disarming Uncle Joe way. And obviously he's going to have his work cut out for him when it comes to unifying the country, you know, not to mention unifying the Democratic Party. But that's encouraging. That was really encouraging for me to see. I think better. Joe Biden mentioned better angels more than once in his victory speech.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I do think that Joe Biden has taken exactly the tone and the approach that one would have hoped he would take in terms of really opening his arms to the American people, broadly speaking, and talking directly to the need for us to, you know, get beyond the bitter kind of political sectarianism that has maligned just our democracy for, you know, so long before Trump, you know, but certainly during the last 4 years. I think that it is important to acknowledge the fact, and I do think Joe Biden is sincere in all that, because I think Joe Biden has always been that kind of a person and that kind of a politician. I mean, I remember, I think even during the primary, he said something along the lines of, "Oh, you know, somebody got mad at me because I said I liked Republicans. Oh, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." And so,
Right.
you know. And actually, it was in the context of him saying that Mike Pence is a good guy, I think, and you know, but you know, he also one of the sad things about politics is the fact that when we say things as political figures, and I just have the barest sense of this, having run for office myself, I put my own experience out of it, but for politicians, you know, you say something in the past and you carry it with you into the future. It marks your credibility when you say things that seem to be, you know, bitterly unfair to people, certainly, you know, the followers of your political opponents, that can make it difficult to bring everybody to the table once you yourself have, you know, gotten to the head of that table. In Joe Biden's case, I think that there has been just to give you what I think is the most salient example here. You know, Joe Biden said that the the animating impulse for him to run for president was in the aftermath of Charlottesville, seeing President Trump stand up in front of the American people and make the comment that there are good people on both sides with respect to the folks who collided, on that fateful day, clearly saying, the president clearly communicating the fact that he saw the neo-Nazis, the tiki torch wielding racists, out there as being, the moral equals of the people who are out there battling the fascism and the racism that they represented, right? And Joe Biden is far from the only person saying that. I mean, this is what was recounted in the mainstream media. This is something that was sort of taken as received wisdom, across the political, well, not across the political landscape, but for so much of America. And yet many conservatives and, even some folks who aren't Republicans, but who just tried to take an honest look at this, looked at the whole context of Trump's remarks, even at the time, and just noted that if you waited another 5 seconds, the very next thing Trump says is something along the lines of, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis, I mean, just very explicitly saying that, he was talking about people who came out there to protest the removal of Confederate statue because they felt it was a part of their heritage or what have you, right? And so even if you think that those people are worthy of condemnation too, intellectual honesty would at least suggest that, it be acknowledged that, in this particular moment, let's say Donald Trump has said 100 other racist things, but in this particular moment, he did draw that vital distinction, at least. He did go out of his way to say that when he said that there are fine people on both sides who he was excluding from that, were the racists involved in the situation. Now, a lot of folks on the right now are looking at Joe Biden and saying, because of statements like that, because of him in the past saying to an audience full of African Americans back when he was in the 2012 election that Republicans were going to put y'all back in chains. You remember that statement?
He has a long history of putting his foot in his mouth when it comes to race. I mean, he told Charlemagne the God, he said, if you don't vote for me, y'all ain't black.
Right. And so he part of what's going to make it a bit difficult for him, and all that, I even put those statements in some different categories because what he said to Charlemagne, I can see that as an off the cuff sort of thing where he reached too far, and he apologized for that, right? But the comment about Trump at Charlottesville is one that to this day, he's never spoken to the nuance of that, because
I get that
he had to. But for conservatives, for Reds, for people who, and for a lot of objective observers who felt like, even for people who think, as I feel, by the way, that President Trump has said so many things that aren't just inflammatory, but also, racially and culturally, insensitive, or at least seem to, suggest, seem to poke at certain prejudices that people might have, or may seem to wink and nod to them, I should say. That nevertheless, this is a thing that Trump was innocent of, that Joe Biden could have addressed by saying, look, President Trump has said a million things that I condemn, and he should have taken a stronger stand in condemnation of white supremacy here, so on and so forth. He could have just ignored that one example because it's one of the easiest examples to disprove. But to keep the narrative in place, it seemed like Joe Biden was willing to embrace something that just was factually incorrect. And it makes people on the right, it gives the folks on the right an easy excuse to doubt his sincerity. Now, I don't doubt his sincerity. I think that it's hard in politics because you've got to tell a story that gets people to line up behind you. And you've got to tell a story that's simple enough for people to follow. And I think that's just what Joe Biden was doing. But it just shows that it's going to be hard for any president, and it's going to be hard for Joe Biden, like you said, to unite the American people. And, we've got to set the stage for a certain graciousness that allows for us all to look past each other's failings a little bit. And it's hard when the precedent for that wasn't set beforehand. So I just wanted to give voice to some of the frustrations and cynicism that some Reds may be feeling because.
Yeah, and I get that. I mean,
everybody, yeah.
It does seem a little selective on the one hand to say that President Trump's words don't matter, and then go say, well, look at the transcript, his words matter.
Right.
But I mean, I take your point. I think that, believe me, Democrats and the mainstream media is not in the habit of being charitable to Donald Trump when it comes to his remarks on race. And I don't think that's necessarily fair. I think it's understandable given the context of his history, and of course is animated by the emotion that people feel. But I take your point. I don't think it's fair, and I can see why it would raise folks' hackles that Biden made that such a centerpiece of his campaign. But I think the larger point still stands, at least for me. I think there was such a fundamental difference between Trump and Biden in terms of how they talk to the American people. And I think that that difference came into sharp relief with coronavirus. You know, I mean, Trump was sort of explicitly dividing America into red states and blue states when it came to coronavirus. And I think Biden made the point a few times that, well, you know, it just comes back to what Obama said in 2004. And I think, you know, there are no red states, there are no blue states, there are the United States. And it's idealistic, right?
Well, Biden did have a funny moment in the debate with Trump, because Trump did, you know, go out of his way to make the point that it was Democratic states who were sort of messing things up, and Biden responded and said something like, "Look, it's not about, you know, Republican states and Democratic states. There are no Republican or Democratic states. By the way, it's the Republican states where the cases are actually spiking right now." I mean, it was something like just that kind of, like, you know, out of both sides of my mouth sort of thing, right? And but that just goes to the core difficulty of politics, right? Because on the one hand, you've got to compete and draw a contrast if you're going to win, or at least that's always seemed to be the way. On the other hand, if you're going to be a good leader, you've got to bring people together. And so even within the same sentence, you can see that tension breaking out in people. But yeah, I take your point, and I give Joe Biden serious credit, I think, for trying to aspire in that direction, even while I understand why it is a lot of folks aren't necessarily sold on his sincerity in that direction as of yet. But I hope that he can genuinely prove it, you know?
Totally. And I think in some ways, a lot of this will come into focus once the composition of the Senate is known, because I think if the Republicans retain control of the Senate, that's where words turn into action. And I think Biden and McConnell will both have incentives to not work with one another, but I think they'll also have pressure from the American people to work together to pass coronavirus relief. I mean, we're in such dire straits as a country that you would hope that the adversity would cause them to work together. Then again, say the Democrats do win these two runoffs and they control the Senate because of Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote, Biden's going to be under a lot of pressure from the left to try to ram things through. I think he'll have a little bit of trouble with, you know, senators like Joe Manchin, for example. I don't think the Democrats would be able to pack the court with a 50-50 majority, but those would be two very different scenarios. And I think that's part of why so many mainstream Republicans are worried about telling Trump he should concede, because they want those Trump voters in Georgia to be activated for those January elections. But before we get too deep into the inside baseball, I could talk about this with you all day. I think we have 10 minutes left here. Let's look forward and talk a little bit about Braver Angels and our role, and what our role can be in trying to help heal the nation, bring people together with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right. I think, as some of our listeners will know, our current signature ongoing initiative that is just beginning now to become implemented in some ways is called With Malice Toward None. With Malice Toward None was originally conceived as a program to advance reconciliation in the wake of the election,
Right.
and to provide Americans on both sides of the election question, whether you're pleased or whether you're displeased. And that does not preclude people who do not think the election has been decided. Those people are welcome and encouraged to participate as well. But to give folks a space to talk through and process their feelings about the election, and then to bring the two groups together to talk. And so the way this works in practice is you or your church or your college or your civic group can sign up to participate in the With Malice Toward None program to put together gatherings, the first of which are with like-minded. So if you have a congregation that's made up of Trump voters and Biden voters, you would put them into two separate groups, just as we do in the Red Blue Workshop. And you'd have one gathering of folks who are pleased about what's gone down, one gathering of folks who are displeased. And then later you'd have a second gathering, bring them together, do so with the proven Braver Angels structure.
Right.
So this is now up and running. We are not operating under the assumption that everything's been completely decided, because we recognize that lots of folks out there believe there was widespread voter fraud, and they think there's a lot of Trump voters I've talked to, including our good friend Greg Smith, who was just in last night's ABC Nightline segment. He told me on January 20th, 2021, it'll be Donald Trump getting inaugurated. And I think this is a not uncommon sentiment among Trump supporters.
Well, look, there's litigation that is pending, right?
There's litigation that is pending. Fox News is now in the doghouse.
Yeah.
But my larger point is that all folks are welcome, and we're not here to relitigate the election or argue about whether it's decided, but we're here to bring Americans together, regardless of how they feel about the election, under the recognition that, the other side of the country is not going anywhere. And, even though Joe Biden won the popular vote by 5 million votes, there's over 70 million folks who voted for Donald Trump. And we share a country, we share a community, and we did, and I hope still do, share an ethos of collaboration, of give and take, of charity for all and malice toward none. So in these last couple of minutes, John, I just want to hear you step back a little bit and think over the past 2 years what we've been able to accomplish. Now that the election's happened, now that there are these two runoffs, now that we're going to have an inauguration with a country that needs not just our political leaders to work together to solve problems, but needs our ordinary citizens to find ways to relate to one another again as human beings, as Americans, as friends, as colleagues, as fellow folks on the softball team, whatever it is.
Right.
Where do you see the potential, the promise, and the peril for America and for Braver Angels in the rest of this year and 2021?
Right. Well, I think that you've got to look at the growth of the community that we've built over the last 2 years. When Braver Angels started, we were Better Angels originally, of course, and it came in the aftermath of the gathering of just a few, just about a dozen or so people from each side of the aisle in a barn in South Lebanon, Ohio, where folks were able to challenge each other to see if they could find not just common ground, but a deeper human connection in the aftermath of what was then the most bitterly polarizing election America had ever been through. And they did it. Ciaran just mentioned Greg Smith, our friend, evangelical Christian, former small-town sheriff, Trump supporter. That's where he made friends with Kuyar Mustashi, Persian immigrant, Muslim, leader of the local Democratic County Party. And, they found a connection in their faith, even though religion is the thing that even beyond politics, you might expect to polarize them, right? But so many stories like that came out of those early days where Bill Doherty, David Blankenhorn, yourself, Ciaran, I wasn't even in the mix yet. April Lawson was still working for David Brooks as an editorial assistant, but she, as a journalist, covered that initial bus tour. Braver Angels went up and down. Well, you guys were on the East Coast, right? And just held these workshops, bringing people together in state after state. NPR picked up the story. Word of mouth started to spread the news, and suddenly, over the course of a few months, Better Angels was born, and it grew from there. To college campuses, small town communities across America. We built out our fledgling media network, the Braver Angels, the Better Angels podcast. I came in somewhere in the spring of 2018 officially. We found ourselves covered by the mainstream media and local papers throughout the country. Our programs, when the lockdown came about, after we'd become Braver Angels, shifted online. We started reaching many thousands more people than we had reached before. April Lawson built up the Braver Angels debate program. It gave the American people the opportunity to find a constructive venue to debate partisan politics and issues that are sensitive in the area of race, in the area of ethnicity and culture and identity. We proved the fact that you could take Trump-supporting conservatives in Texas and the rural South and put them in a room or a virtual room with African Americans, folks from urban communities and the social justice left, to talk about things like defunding the police, systemic racism, that we could do it in a way to where we can find areas of common ground and establish a deeper understanding of one another. And we did that type of thing week after week after week with hundreds of Americans at a time, in many cases. While at the same time on this podcast, engaging with thought leaders, influencers, politicians, journalists, folks who represent some of the most stridently held views from across the political spectrum, people with their own audiences, and we challenge them to talk about politics in a unifying kind of a way, and to challenge themselves to access their better angels, even when they felt like they were stridently and bitterly opposed to what they heard coming from the other point of view, right? But in the midst of all of that activity, Ciaran, we've built up a community of thousands and thousands of Americans that has lasted, that has endured over these couple of years. People who are working together from New York to Austin to Los Angeles to Iowa, all over the country. And what we've proven is that a community that is as diverse as ours is across the spectrum of politics and identities and experiences can nevertheless cohere when it shares a deeper commitment to the goodwill that animates the constructive balance that can and does exist in America when we are at our best between liberty, the ideal of liberty, and the ideal of equality. Some of us focus our philosophical energies on removing the barriers towards our being able to act the way that we want to and live the way that we want to, worship the way that we want to. Others of us want to focus in on the questions of social justice and equity and making sure that our systems and structures are functioning in a way that acknowledges the disparities in our society. But I think most all of us recognize the fact that there are vital principles that animate Americans from across our political life that need to be honored and understood in an empathetic way if we're going to move forward together as a nation. Doesn't mean we agree with each other at every step of the way. We don't have to actually work together as an American family. And so the promise of this moment is that regardless of what the outcome of upcoming lawsuits and the final vote count may be, that as we move into this next phase in American life, the promise is that what Braver Angels has proven to be true in its own community, the idea that we can cohere as a community, that we can illustrate and uplift this promise and potential as it exists in the United States of America as a whole. And I believe that we can do that. I believe that we can be a part of a movement that shifts us in that direction. And the only peril that would make me doubt it is if folks like, you, Ciaran, and people listening to this podcast cease to believe it. But folks do believe in this. It is something worth believing in. And I believe it. I believe that we can reach that beloved community and that more perfect union. So that, and so that's the conviction upon which I stand. I'm looking forward to 2021.
Me too, man. It's been quite a year. It's crazy. Just to bring it back, late January, chilling with you in the park. Now it's November. I'm about to turn 30.
Indeed. We better wrap up.
Yeah, it's been good to be with you, John. Let's get back in the saddle soon, and looking forward to seeing where this podcast goes as we continue to build it out. Email us, media@braverangels.org. Go to our website. Sign up for With Malice Toward None. Host a gathering. Much love.
Till next time, folks.